So we've got the 5 communication techniques of the no-limit selling system. And the 5 communication techniques, are unique and specific ways of talking to sellers to get them to be more direct and honest. Now, I mentioned before that almost all sellers lie, right? They have that defense mechanism. When you go on a car dealership, right? Actually, let me tell you a story. When I remember when I bought my first new car, right? And it was a Hyundai, I think, what was it, like a 2006, 2005. And I knew I was going to get one over on the sales rep. And the car salesman comes up and he says, "Can I help you?" And the first thing I said to him was, "Oh, I'm just looking. I'm not buying." When the truth was, I was actually there to buy a car. Why was I on a car lot? And so what I immediately did was withdraw from the salesperson, right? And in terms of, I didn't want him to think that I was too eager to buy a car. And by the way, I was very eager to buy that car. I just had taken a new job, and my previous company had given me a company car. And this new job, I actually had to pay for my own car, but they were going to reimburse me. And I was starting on Monday, and so I had to have the car, but I didn't tell the salesperson that. And so I, held my cards close to my chest because I wanted that to be a negotiating position, right? Motivated sellers do that all the time. So it's really, really important that you get these down so that you can, again, be a truth teller and expect your prospects to do the same. All right, now sellers often avoid saying what's really on their minds in an effort to protect themselves and or to avoid hurting the other person's feelings. So sometimes they'll tell you that they'll think about your offer when really the answer is no, right? You have no shot of doing business with them. They're just going to list it with an agent, and that's okay. That's okay, because now you can move on to someone who really needs your help. There's a lot of prospects that need to be walked through this that are ready to do business, and you're going to be exhausted if you're spending time with people who aren't ready to do business. All right, so we use these techniques during each step of the no limit sales system to qualify prospects as fast as possible. Again, write these down. You want to qualify prospects as fast as possible. You want to push motivated prospects through the selling process as fast as possible. So you could shorten the sales cycle, right? Who wants to wait forever for their paychecks? I see forever, new investors get caught up and no one knows how to do anything. It just gets caught up, and we've seen that in our own office where we're dealing with new people, and it seems like stuff's in escrow forever, or we're dealing with a person, there's no contract, and nothing's happening. And so you've got to, again, push them through the selling process. They're looking to you for help. That's really important. Okay, now you want to also determine what the sellers value most in the transaction. Okay, and I mentioned that earlier. Okay, so here is the first communication techniques of the no limits selling system. Okay, the first is redirecting, and I'm a big fan of always controlling the conversation. Now, how many people, and you could leave your comments here, have ever done any kind of marketing campaign and they get on the telephone, and all of a sudden now the prospect starts asking questions, one after another, like rapid fire questions, like, what's your name? What's your company? How much could you give me for my house? How long have you been in business? Aren't you going to lowball me, right? And they start doing this. Has anyone ever experienced that? Because that is something that happens to every single new investor. And what happens is that what you automatically do is now you start to answer those questions, and you're automatically in a defensive position. You're not on the offense, but you're on the defense. And now all of a sudden you're defending yourself that you are legitimate, right? That you are a good investor and that you're not a scammer and that you're good and that you bought a lot of houses, right? And that you're a member of the BBB, right? And now you're presenting without gathering information, all right? Now, information. I keep adding S's to the end of all my words today. I don't know why. But, what happens is now they have control, and they are now asking all the questions, and now we are doing most of the talking. And in a sales presentation, whenever you're talking to a prospect, that's wrong. You want to be doing the listening and asking the questions so that a tailored solution. If you are doing all the talking, you don't find out what the seller really needs in the transaction. You don't find out their need, their hurt, and their pain. And now you can't dig deep and really offer that custom tailored solution. And now you're just wasting time. And it's also no fun when you're getting poked and prodded, right? And feel like you're being defensive. That's really, really, really important. Someone says, are you going to try to steal my house? And that's a real one. No, sir. New investors are going to say, no, I'm not going to try to steal your house. And then you go on and they still prod you for more questions. And so it's really important that you use the technique of redirecting, which I love. All right. So this is a process of redirecting the conversation with a question. You can either answer a question with a question or follow a statement with a question. Okay, I'm going to give a few examples here. Perfect example is I have a question from somebody that says, are you going to steal my house? Now, I will respond to that myself, again, gaining control. The new investor would say, well, no, I'm not going to steal your house. We'll give you a great price, right? And now they say, well, how much are you going to give me? How much are you going to give me? That's what the new investors do. And so what's really important now is you gain control back of the conversation by redirecting. So for myself, if I heard that question, are you going to try to steal my house? I would say, what do you mean by that? And then, shh, I keep quiet, and I'm going to listen for the answer, right? And all of a sudden, they may spew out a ton of information. They may say, well, the last investor that came by only offered me $250,000, and I know that my house is worth $300,000, which now then you could say, okay, well, what were you looking to get for your property? And now you can turn the conversation so that you can get more information. Now, you can either use that or you can give a statement and then ask a question. So my statement to that question would be, sir, would you like me to, are you going to try to steal my house? Would be, I'm not sure. And then I'm just going to be quiet for a second. And I would say, let me ask you a question. Why did you ask me that? Right, so I can use a statement and then I can ask a question, but it enables you to get back that conversation. You've ever seen the movie The 40-Year-Old Virgin? Great movie. And there's a scene where the star of the movie is in a video store, and there's a girl in there that he's talking to, and she keeps asking him a question, and he keeps responding with a question, right? And he keeps doing it, and he has control of the conversation, and he's just sitting there being really witty, and he just owns it, and she's getting like all giddy because of the fact that he's asking questions, and that's really, really important. And let me give you a couple other examples. Now, you want to use a redirect whenever a prospect says or asks you something that puts you on the spot in order to regain control of that conversation, right? For example, and here's another one. If the seller asks you if you're going to lowball them, that's a great question. You could reply, well, what would you consider a lowball offer? Or can you share with me why you asked me that? That's an odd question, right? Just right off the bat, you saw my postcard, I'm an investor. Let me ask you, what is a lowball to you? Because, I'm an investor and I need to make a profit. So tell me more about why you called me today, right? And now you've regained control of that conversation. So next one, if the seller asks if they're interested in selling and they respond for the right price, you could reply, well, what's the right price? Or I'll say, you know what? I'll buy at the right price. And I'll use that statement. That's really funny because I'll buy at the right price, and I'll say, is it possible that we could meet someplace where we could both get what we want, right? And then I just shut up and I listen, and that's really important. So once you get to that zone where you can make a statement and get them to laugh, and then ask a question and get control of that conversation, that's when you can own whoever's on the phone and have them in the palm of your hand. That's really, really important. Number two, okay, is still on redirecting. If the prospect ever repeats their question, answer it if it meets your needs. Okay, if a seller asks a question like, are you an all-cash buyer? And that question is going to meet my needs, meaning that it's going to push the sale forward. I will answer that question, right? And then respond with a question to gain back control. So if they say, how quickly can you close, right? I may say, well, I can close as quickly as 40 hours if you want, right? But, that really depends. Can you tell me why you asked me that, right? So I can answer that if I feel like it's going to push the sale forward. If it's not going to serve your needs, don't ask the question right away. You've got to dig deeper and find the reasoning behind the question. Also, you can also respond with a takeaway. And I love the takeaway. I'm constantly using it. If someone says, well, I can close in as fast as 48 hours, but that's if I really want to buy this house. And I can't guarantee you that this is a house I want. I need you to ask more questions about the property. Is it okay if I ask you some more questions before we move forward? And now I've taken it away. I've gained control of that conversation. You always want to be pulling away. If you can learn anything from the no limit selling system, anything at all, and you forget everything, this is the thing to learn. The takeaway is the most powerful thing in sales. If you can constantly be the reluctant buyer and take away the sale, right, and say, I'm not sure if I can help you, maybe we're not a fit, right? I'm going to talk about that, but is the most powerful technique in all of real estate investing and sales in general. I mean, if you do it, it's funny. I'll with my wife, it's funny. I'll be like, hey, do you want to go out to dinner tonight? And she'll be like, well, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hey, it's okay if you don't want to go, right? And all of a sudden she's like, no, let me call my parents, and I'm getting the babies. It only works so long. It only works so long with a spouse before they sniff that out. But it's a great tool to use in your business. All right. Now you can also acknowledge the seller's question before using a redirect by saying something like, that's a good question. What made you ask me that? Right. And so that way it's not always I call these little things cushions. Whenever you ask a question with a question or you use a redirect, you want it to sound natural, right? And so I'll ask a question like, hey, that's a really, really good question. What made you ask me that? Instead of saying, well, what made you ask me that? That's a little harsh, right? So make it sound natural, be a friend, right? Be a listener and make it conversational. So I always say, I get that question all the time, but I'm just curious, what made you ask me that? Right? And just make it your own, make it in your own voice. That's really, really, really important. So redirects, sorry about that, can also be used to uncover unspoken desires or interests. Now remember, the seller is on the phone, and their goal is to lie to you, right? They're like me on that car dealership lot when I had my arms crossed trying to get one over on that salesperson. That's really, really, really important. Okay, so remember that they are almost always lying to you, and it is your responsibility, okay, to ask those questions and uncover your needs, because you know where your heart is, right? You know that you're there to help them, but naturally they're going to hold their cards to their chest, and I would say that's 90% of prospects. They could be ready to jump off a cliff about their property, but most prospects won't share that with you, and you have to be able to uncover that and use these redirects to be able to do that. They can say, how soon can you close? Or, how many houses, like I get the question all the time, like how many houses have you bought, right? And I'll say, we've bought a lot of houses, right? You see how I answer that question. But, my question to you is, why did you ask me that? Right? And then that may give a whole stream of events where you could dig deeper and say, well, I had it listed with a realtor and it fell through, and then I had this investor come by and he didn't perform, and and then my escrow company, they just suck, and my tenant's in there. And so you have to be able, again, to uncover those with redirects. It is a great way to find hidden objections. It's really, really, really important. So develop that skill. And now, just another example, if the seller asks you how fast you can close, you reply, well, how fast would you like me to close? Right? Or you might say, I can close as fast as 48 hours, but I could really close in the date of your choice. But the question is really, what's the ideal date for you? Maybe we can make that happen. I'm not 100% sure, but let's find out what I can do for you. And that's really important, again, to uncover that. Don't assume that they want to close in 48 hours. They could be freaked out about that, right? Maybe they want to close in 6 months, just like this lady who I was on the phone with. Again, you want to do 90% of the listening, 10% of the talking. All right, moving on to the next slide. All right, now, the stealth mismatch. Now, this is the liar buster. Okay, this is the lie destroyer. This thing works like a heat-seeking missile to find the truth. All right, and again, this is the stealth mismatch. This is something that I got from NLP. All right, NLP. If you want to look it up, Google it. But neuro-linguistic programming, and mismatching is basically a human response. If I say, "Are you desperate to sell?" the immediate reaction from a motivated seller is going to be, "I'm not desperate." But if I say, well, the good thing is, if I say we can close in 48 hours, they're going to respond, well, I don't want to close in 48 hours. If I say your house doesn't need, if I say your house is in really bad shape, they're probably going to respond, well, it's in not that bad of a shape. And so it's really important, again, this is just the way human psychology works, is that you tell the prospect the opposite of what they're expecting you to say. And this works so well. This is a total ninja tactic. And so, for example, actually, let me go over the first point here. This is the process of making a statement or asking a question that takes something your prospect said to a negative extreme. It's very similar to the concept of reverse psychology, in which you're suggesting the opposite of what you intend in hopes the prospect will correct you, thus revealing the true feelings or intentions. For example, you can use mismatching to test motivation. All right, if the seller says they aren't sure about their asking price, you would reply, well, I'm sure you're okay waiting a few months until the right offer comes along. And then I shh, and I don't say a word. And you listen. Now, if they say, you know what, I am going to wait for the right price, I don't need to sell, you know you probably don't have a motivated prospect on the phone. And that's okay. But if they're lying, they're going to say, no, actually, I wanted to sell this week. Boom! Now you got the prospect, right? You said the opposite, and now they're going to come back naturally and tell you the truth. You can also use mismatching to uncover unspoken pain. For example, if the seller says they may continue to rent the property, and I get this a lot, well, I'll just continue renting it, right? You would reply, so it sounds like you're okay with being a landlord and dealing with the tenants for another few years, right? It sounds like a great investment property for you. Just shut up, shh, and hear. I'm going to say, yeah, I am okay. At that point, you can gently hang up the phone and say, I'll call you in 3 years, right? Or you can say, they're going to say, well, no, actually, I'm just tired of dealing with it. I'm tired of the drive and, the repairs, and actually, they're late. Another one that we use, and I know this is not on the slide, but I'll say, well, the good thing is that your tenants pay market rent on time every single month. Sounds like, it's a great investment property for you. They'll say, no, they're late, or, they haven't paid for a few months. And that's really, really, really important, because now you're going to uncover their pain. You're going to know whether you have a $10,000 deal or a $50,000 deal, right? You're also negotiating. If the bigger the pain, the bigger the problem, the bigger the storm, the more money that you're going to make. And that's why it's so important to uncover this pain. Number 3 is reluctance. Now, this is the process of pulling away from the seller. Okay, example, I'm not sure if I can buy your property. What else can you tell me about it? Right? Immediately now you control the conversation. Right? You're not saying, oh, I'm desperate to buy your property. I'm going to do a great job. I can close fast. You're making them chase you and saying, well, what do you mean you can't buy my property? You sent me this card. Well, I can say, well, I send out a lot of these cards. Right? I just wait to see who calls me back. Right? I use things like, we may not be the best option for each other. Or, I'm not sure I can meet your price expectations. You might be better off fixing it up and listing it, right? Most new investors, they're not saying that, right? Agents are not. If a real estate agent comes over there, they're not saying, well, you're better off selling to an investor. They're not doing that. They're chasing the prospect the entire time. And if you chase the prospect, what happens is they're going to run the other way, right? If you chase a dog on the street, what's the dog going to do, right? The dog is going to run, right? If you run away from the dog, what do? They chase you, right? Unless you're Cesar Millan, right? But Cesar Millan, I know he's not going to go chasing after every dog, right? He's going to say a word, shh, shh. And that's the way that we're going to control our prospect. Another word that I use to also, it's a form of reluctance. I say, hey, have you thought about just listing it, and getting a property manager, or really holding on to the property? And so that's a negative mismatch, right, that I just spoke about, where I said, hey, have you thought about just listing it or fixing it up? But it's also reluctance. I'm pulling away constantly, saying, hey, you know what, I'd love to serve you, but if I can't, that's okay too, right? Now, one of the things, if I get someone who's being combative on the phone, this is one of my favorites. Have you ever been on the phone with a combative seller? Like, you sense a little bit of motivation, right, and you want to stay on the phone, but they're really combative, right? Leave a comment. If you felt that, leave a comment in the question box. Tell me, am I the only one to struggle with that? As soon as you feel like you're combative, right? But they've got some motivation. This is going to come no fun. And now you're going to be defending yourself the entire time. And one of the things that I'll say is if a seller is being combative, I'll say, I'm not sure if there's a match here. Is there something that you're not telling me that would make me feel like we're our match? Otherwise, it's okay. We can part as friends and we don't have to do business. How powerful is that? Whenever I feel any kind of combativeness with a seller, that's what I'll say. I'll say, hey, look, I'm not sure there's a match here. I'm sensing that you don't like me or you don't like my product or I've done something wrong to you. And, look, I don't want you to sell me your house if you don't want to. I'm just here to serve, right? Is there something that you're not telling me that would make me feel we're our match? Otherwise, it's okay. We can get off and, I want to get home to my kids, right? And now you own that seller. Now they'll get back in your hand and they'll start to behave. Now, if they're still a jerk after that, right, maybe they're not a prospect and get off the telephone. But I always love to do that. So try that. If you get on the phone, write that down. I'm not sure if there's a match here. Is there something that you're not telling me that would make me feel like you're not a match? Now, everything on here, right, you don't have to use word for word, right? You can write it down and use those, but it doesn't have to be word for word. It could be your style. It's the technique. It's the, you can make it yours. Just make sure that the basic premise is the same. Now, number 4 are verbal commitments, right? These are commitments made by yourself or the seller. This is how you push the sale forward. Every time you're on the phone, you want to be inching forward, right? 1 foot at a time, right? 1 foot at a time. You're never moving backwards. You're always moving forward. Just like you're like a train. You're a locomotive, and you're not stopping. Even if it's slow, you're making progress every single day. Don't stop. And you get this by getting commitments. What is the next step? For example, the seller has something they need to do prior to moving forward, i.e. speak to their accountant or have the house appraised or speaking to a spouse or whatever that is, right? Have them commit to doing so before your next appointment. You also want to be specific about what they need to accomplish. So for example, this deal in Hollywood Hills, the sales rep was really struggling and the siblings were all fighting. And the answer really to that question was, well, we're arguing and we can't just, get all together and, we just can't make it happen, right? And so the commitment that we got from all 3 of them was, well, look, if we can get you all in a room, all together, and we can have a neutral arbitrator there and get this deal done, are you willing to do business that day? And they all said yes. We asked all 3 siblings. We got them in a room. We had an arbitrator there, and it was a $45,000 deal, right? A co-wholesaler brought us that deal, but we had a title issue. And so we had to push that forward every single step of the process. It's really, really important that you do that. Right? Now, you should always be clear on the next step in the sales process and its purpose. The seller must be clear on this as well. Now, I recently met with a salesperson who was selling something to me. And this guy was good. I mean, I thought that he must have gone through our training. But he said to me, because I told him, I said, I'm going to think about it. Why don't we talk next week? And he looked at me and he says, well, why? What are we going to talk about? Right? The guy totally pulled away. And I was like, well, I mean, he's like, you just told me the price was too high. And now you got to think about it. He's like, what is there to talk about? It sounds like this is dead. Right? And all of a sudden he's like, well, and I was like, well, the price is too high. If the price was a little bit different, I might consider purchasing. He's like, well, what do you mean consider? Is that a yes or no? Because if I'm going to go back to my boss and ask for a better price, right, I've got to know that you're serious. And if you're not serious, that's okay. Just tell me no, right? This guy's like now took control of the conversation. He's taking me to school, right? And, I said, okay, no, if you can do, $1,000 per month, I could probably do that. And he says, well, probably or definitely. I'm not going to go with my boss with it probably. And I said, okay, no, I could definitely do that. What did he do? He got a commitment, right? One of the things that you'll learn in Sandler sales training, he says, no wishy-washy commitments. Wishy-washy commitments. That means that you're getting a half commitment, right? You're just trying to check the box, but it's not a real commitment. So if they say, well, I'll call you sometime next week, that's not a commitment. That's a wishy-washy commitment, meaning that it's not definite. You haven't set in stone. You haven't agreed what's next. They could say, well, I'll talk to my business partner and see what he says, and I'll call you next week at 3. Well, no, what are you going to talk about? What's the outcome, right? The outcome is you have to find out if you can do a 1031 exchange, whatever it is. I know I'm using some words here, but you got to find out what the next step in the sales process is, get real commitments, be clear of what the outcome is of the next meeting. So that way you can push the sale forward. Don't be scared of the answer, right? This is going to flush out all kinds of objections. Now, number 5 is conditioning. This is the process of setting or resetting the seller's expectations. Whenever you're digging through pain, you're going to give them a low offer, right? And so you want to give them that expectation during the entire sales process. So when you actually give them that offer, it's actually higher than they thought it would be. All right. For example, you can condition the seller on what you expect in terms of price by letting them know you're typically not the highest bidder. If a seller says, hey, I'm talking to a lot of investors, I'm going to say, hey, look, I'm not going to be the highest. Why should we even continue talking? Right. And I'll say, what do you value besides price in the transaction? Because I can tell you typically, maybe I'm not going to be rock bottom, but I'm definitely not going to be the highest. Okay. Another way to look at conditioning is simply planting seeds in the seller's mind so there are no surprises later on. Right? If they think I'm going to pay market value for the property and I drop an offer on them at the last minute, they're going to be like, whoa, it's sticker shock. Right? So gradually, have them do this. So I recently completely regutted my house, right? And I thought it was going to cost me $30,000. And over a 6-month period, as I dealt with my contractor, he conditioned me that this is going to cost $150,000, right? And if you would have told me that on the first day, I would have been like, oh my gosh, right? And so he conditioned me during that process and conditioned me and conditioned me and conditioned me. Finally, when he gave me the quote, it wasn't 150, it was 130, right? And I was like, whoa, what a really, really great deal. And I was ready to go. So you always want to condition them during the process that you're not going to pay retail. Tell them you're an investor, you need to be able to make a profit. And again, this is part about being upfront and honest. This makes it really, really, really fun.